Welcome to the Acts Bible Study. Nice to have you with us tonight. And last time, if you remember, we went through Acts chapter 23, and that was just 1 week ago. Or I'm sorry, 2 weeks ago, one Bible study ago. Normally, I don't double up, but wanted to kind of get back on the schedule. We had two speaking schedules ago, so that was the reason for it. Also, um, want to get through the book of Acts this year. So hopefully we'll be able to do that. We seem to be able to move a little quicker as we recount some things that we're very familiar with in earlier parts of the book of Acts. So tonight we'll be covering the next chapter, chapter 24. And last time, what we saw was Paul was beaten by this mob. Now, they later said they just uh, perhaps apprehended him or arrested him, but he was beaten and he was protected from death. He was taken into custody from the commander of the fortress. Now, uh, he was then brought before the Sanhedrin, had the opportunity to answer for himself. And you'll remember the Sanhedrin was half Sadducees, half Pharisees. And Paul's claim was he was being judged for his belief in a resurrection of the dead. That resulted in those two groups disagreeing. And despite this violent mob, despite uncertainty about his immediate future, Jesus Christ appeared to Paul while he was being detained. And he told him, "Be of good cheer, Paul. I still have many other things for you to do." So, kind of a little bit of encouragement there from Jesus Christ. And he needed it because shortly after that, 40 Jews took an oath. They vowed to kill Paul. And we discussed this group of individuals known as the Sicarii. And they were this subgroup of the anti government group known as the Zealots. Uh, to protect Paul and to avoid that killing, hundreds of soldiers and a number of horsemen. They escorted Paul by night to Caesarea Maritima, where he was to be tried by Felix the governor. Now, Caesarea Maritima was founded somewhere between 22 to 10 BC, built by Herod the Great. Herod the Great was also known as Herod the Builder. He built a lot of different places, and it was a major port city. And he named it in honor of Caesar Augustus, and it served as the capital of Roman Judea. And so, what we have is, I'll just show you this picture real quick. You have this Herod's Praetorium, this area out on this coast where Paul was imprisoned, or he was being held. So tonight we'll be going through Acts chapter 24 and beginning in verse 1. So Acts 24 and verse 1 begins, it says, "Now after 5 days, Ananias the high priest came down with the elders and a certain orator named Tertullus. These gave evidence to the governor against Paul." So uh, this is the beginning of Paul's third defense out of the five we have recorded for us. Tertullus, commentaries differ a little bit. Most of them suggest that he was probably a Roman proselyte, one of these individuals who was interested in Judaism and practicing many parts of it. He was, in any case, able to speak both Greek and Hebrew, along with Latin. He would have had a good understanding of Roman laws, Roman customs. Some speculate perhaps he was a Hellenistic Jew, so one of the Jews either of the diaspora or who had been immersed in this Roman culture. And it says that he was an orator. Now, orator in Greek language, oops, let's try this. Orator in the Greek language would be this word rhetor, R-H-E-T-O-R, so rhetor. And rhetor means a speaker, an advocate. In fact, this is where we get the English word rhetoric. And rhetoric simply refers to, rhetoric refers to the art of effective or persuasive speaking or writing. So in the ancient world, this orator was the equivalent of a lawyer. That's according to John Gill's commentary. And I want to just read verse 1 or an excerpt from verse 1 in the King James, the authorized King James. It puts it a little bit clearer. And it says, Ananias descended with a certain orator named Tertullus, who informed the governor against Paul. So that's what he was doing. It was his job to bring these charges against Paul. Now it says after 5 days, so this was the 5-day count begins from when Paul was seized, and this is 12 days after his arrival in Jerusalem. Verse 2 and 3. When he was called upon, Tertullus began his accusation, saying, Seeing that through you we enjoy great peace and prosperity as being brought to this nation by your foresight, we accept it always and in all places, most noble Felix, with all thankfulness. Now, 2025 America, we would say this guy is just blowing steam. He is just putting on a big show, isn't he? Really buttering him up. Well, possibly, but let's remember the context, the time. So Holman Study Bible says Tertullus began with what is known as a captatio benevolentiae, and that is the standard opening of a Greco-Roman speech, which is designed to curry the favor of the listener. And in case you're wondering what on earth are you even talking about, I thought you might say that, and so I will put this up on my screen. So we have these, what is known as the Roman forensic structure. So there's a book I consulted, the Book of Acts, New International Commentary on the New Testament by F.F. Bruce from the 80s. And he says Tertullus's oration followed this classic Roman forensic structure. Began with captatio benevolentiae, and that is, for anyone who can't speak this language, flattery of the judge. So you begin by flattering the judge. The next is the narratio. Narratio is the summary of facts. After that, you have the probatio, and that is the arguments or the evidence that is presented. And then the fourth part is the refutatio, which is the rebuttal of the opposing argument. And, excuse me. So Luke's inclusion of this opening speech, it shows that he was, in fact, familiar with the Greco-Roman procedures, at least to some degree. Now, we have this individual here, Felix. Felix, his real name is Marcus Antonius Felix. Marcus Antonius Felix, and this is I think they call it a medallion or something. I forget where the source is. It's a book from the 1500s, an artist's depiction of Felix based on a medallion or a medal that they found of him. And he was a former slave, Felix was. He rose to power through the influence of his brother. His brother's name was Pallas, and Pallas, as opposed to palace like a building. And his brother was a freedman. So his brother was also a slave at one point, but his brother was an influential advisor to Emperor Claudius. Now, the historian Josephus, he says that Felix's governorship was from AD 52 to AD 59. And Josephus brings out that Felix's governorship was marred by local unrest, by bribery, and suppression of Jewish revolts. Not a great guy. In fact, another historian, very well known, Tacitus, he described Felix as being cruel and licentious, and said that Felix ruled with the authority of a king, but he had the spirit of a slave. So, in other words, what he was saying is Felix had no grace, he had no decorum, he was a very base man. And Tertullus's greeting may have been pleasing to hear, may have been nice sounding to Felix, but we do want to view it in the proper context, and that is the context of AD 57. What events were leading up to AD 57? What happened after AD 57? So there was some internal conflict within the Roman Empire, which impacted the Church of God. We know AD 44, Herod Agrippa, king of Judea, he persecuted Christians. And in Jerusalem, he beheaded James, the son of Zebedee. You could just note Acts 12. Fast forward 5 years, AD 49, Emperor Claudius, he expelled the Jews from Rome. You'll find that in Acts 18. Now, the gospel accounts, the book of Acts, they show us some Jews were unhappy with the Roman government. But we know about the Sicarii, we know about the Sicarii, I should say, we know about the Zealots. But in the broader context, AD 57 shows the Roman Empire generally enjoying a time of peace. This was, comparatively speaking, a very peaceful time. In fact, this is the middle of what is historically referred to as Pax Romana. Pax Romana is a Latin term which means Roman peace or peace of Rome. And Pax Romana spanned about roughly 208 years. Excuse me. It began in 27 BC with Augustus, Emperor Augustus, and it went all the way to AD 180 with the death of Marcus Aurelius. And it was generally accepted that the Roman Empire brought relative peace during its reign for citizens during this time period. Because when you don't have a central government, it's every man for himself. In fact, we see that even back in the book of Judges. Everybody doing what's right in their own eyes. Not a great way to govern a group of people. This is one of the reasons why in the gospel accounts the allegations against Jesus Christ and the allegations now against Paul were not immediately dismissed, but they ended up sticking a little bit. We may think, well, these are kind of ridiculous arguments. How could anyone allow this to go on? Well, the reason is because these individuals were accused, guilty or not, accused of stirring up unrest against the government and violating the Pax Romana. And wanted to share some different factors now which facilitated this period of relative peace under the Pax Romana. So we have 4 basic things, and I'll go through each of them a little more in depth, but just generally speaking, 4 factors which facilitated this period of relative peace under Pax Romana, and that's number 1, religious tolerance, number 2, the Roman roads, number 3, shipping, not talking FedEx or UPS, we're talking boats, and then number 4, a common language. I can make that joke. I'm a dad. I get to make dad jokes. Okay, so we have religious tolerance, Roman roads, shipping, and common language. All of these things played into this success of what is known as the Pax Romana. And so, first one being religious tolerance. Now, Rome was tolerant towards multiple religions. As long as they were peaceful, most religious practices were permitted. The more gods, the better. Let's entreat all the gods so we can have more benefits. That being said, no one was allowed, this is not Babylon anymore, right? So no one was allowed to start a new religion. Babylon, way back around Daniel's time, it was, well, the more gods, the better, and you can bring any new ideas that you want. But here in Rome, it was no, you may not start a new religion. Um, you can use any of the ones that already exist. So Christianity at this time was still considered a sect of Judaism. In fact, we're going to see shortly that Paul emphasizes he is not starting a new religion. In fact, he's observing the same one his ancestors always practiced. And that's a big deal because otherwise he could be imprisoned, which he will be anyway, but imprisoned or tortured or killed. Although not tortured because he's a Roman citizen, but that existed for some anyway. So we also have early church persecution, which was coming from the Jews and not from the Roman Empire. So the Church of God, the Christians, followers of the way, they weren't being persecuted initially by the Romans. It does begin to increase right around this time and shortly after this time. And if you know your history, AD 64, Rome catches fire. Emperor Nero blames it on the Christians. It's debatable whether it was staged and he actually did it, or if it was an accident. But in any case, he blamed the Christians. So that's one of the things, religious tolerance, that facilitated this period of peace under the Pax Romana. In addition to that, we also have the Roman road system. Mr. Scorseth, I've got some interesting facts here for you. Hopefully you'll enjoy some of this. You may already know all about it. Roman roads, incredibly reliable, much safer than roaming around on a winding, muddy road through the woods on your own. Roman roads were, according to this website, geotech.hr, they were estimated, or not estimated, they have been measured to be roughly 18 to 20 feet wide. And as you go down these roads, there's a good chance you may come across a Roman soldier or soldiers as you travel. That's a good thing. They can offer protection. Now, if you're wondering, these roads, they still exist today. We're 2,000 years later. What on earth are roads from 2,000 years ago doing when my street outside can't last 2 years? Ridiculous. Well, let's talk about it. What you see in this diagram up on the right side of your screen, if you have one. If you don't, I'll just go through. There's basically 5 different sections. The base is just whatever dirt or soil or natural material is there once they dig down to the level they want. And that's just compressed. They use a lot of weight and traffic to compress it. On top of that, you have this next layer referred to as statumen, and it is crushed rock. And it says, the sources say it was 10 inches to 24 inches worth of crushed rock. Next on top of that, you have rudis, this layer called rudis, and that is also crushed rock, but mixed in with cement mortar. And there's 8 inches of that. So you've got 10 inches to 2 feet of crushed rock covered by crushed rock mixed with cement. All this is sitting on a firm, compacted base. On top of that, you have 12 inches of a concrete base of cement, sand, and gravel. And then on top of that, you've got this compressed base. You've got 1 to 2 feet of crushed rock. You've got another 8 inches of crushed rock and cement, another foot of cement, sand, and gravel. And then finally, like you see in the picture on the left and you see on the top, you have what they call rock blocks. And these are 6 inches deep or thick. So that's a pretty thick amount of material that they laid down here. And that's why these roads still are in existence in many cases today. In fact, there's an old adage you may have said, maybe even heard, and that old adage is one that kind of alluded to what we see in this picture, and that is, all roads lead to Rome. Well, notice in the picture, literally all these roads, they do lead to Rome. It's like this hub and spoke system where the hub is Rome and all the roads go out from there. And there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of kilometers or miles of roads in the Roman Empire. So all these roads contributed to ease of trade and economic prosperity. This Roman road system had also allowed for a successful Roman mail system. We don't know a lot about the mail system, but we do know some things from the Bible. We have these ideas of personal messengers, and it seems as though there was some sort of formal mail system in existence. Why do we think that? Paul's letters were repeatedly delivered, and it wasn't like, well, I sent you a letter and you got it 3 weeks later, like the United States Postal Service. No, Paul would send out letters, and they seemed to be received in a regular, reliable fashion. I've sent anointed cloths, and people say 10 days later, hey, I never got the cloth you sent. And then 3 or 4 days later, they'll say, oh, I just got it in the mail today. Well, if only we had the Roman mail system, maybe it would work better. I don't know. Um, One of the other things, so two other things. So we have religious tolerance. We have the Roman roads. Also playing into this period of relative peace in the Roman Empire, we have this idea of shipping. Again, not certainly not USPS, but not mail and packages, but boats. Now, it's notable throughout the book of Acts. We've read a few different times. Paul and his companions, they often use ships to travel safely within the expanse of the Roman Empire. Now, the Roman Empire was so successful in its shipping ventures because they controlled virtually everything around that they dubbed the Mediterranean Sea in Latin Mar Nostrum. M-A-R-E, like mare, Mar Nostrum. M-A-R-E space N-O-S-T-R-U-M. And that term in Latin means my sea or our sea. And if I'm not mistaken, and I may be, but I don't have it in my notes, I believe the term Mediterranean Sea didn't come about until maybe the 400s AD, so several hundred years later. Now, this picture on your screen is from 60 years after this, after 50 AD, but it gives you the general idea that shows you all the surrounding areas and territories to the Mediterranean Sea were controlled by Rome. So there's not going to be any pirates. There's not going to be any people that are trying to take your ships captive or cause trouble, because you're going to get the whole Roman Empire brought down on you if you do that. So shipping contributed to this idea of peace. Also, fourth reason why Pax Romana existed at this time, you have the common language. So Greek was widespread. It was considered the common language, much like English is in the world today. Many people in the world don't like English, but they'll still speak it. And that's because it's the commonly accepted language of commerce, of law, of all these different things. So those things played into this idea of Pax Romana and this time of relative peace, despite the Jewish revolts, despite the small areas of wars. For example, we know in some parts of the world, they are at war. Haiti is at war. South Sudan, they are at war. Here in America, we don't even think about those things because it's totally off our radar. The Jews were revolting. Throughout the rest of the Roman Empire, it may not have come to their attention. They may not have been as aware of it as they were in the province of Judea. So some of these periods or areas of civil unrest were more localized. So back in the Bible, Acts chapter 24, verse 4. Probably wondering how we're going to finish the chapter with such a slow start. Well, we will. Some of the sections are much, we'll cover more verses at once. So, verse 4, nevertheless, do not to be tedious to you any further, I beg you to hear, by your courtesy, a few words from us. Obviously, they're not concerned with wasting anybody's time. And the subtle implication here is if you could just go ahead and proclaim this guy guilty, we'll get it out of your hair. That's what they wanted. Verse 5 and 6. And here are the serious charges against Paul in these two verses. The reason why they came down to Felix. For we have found this man a plague, a creator of dissension among all the Jews throughout the world, and a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. He even tried to profane the temple. We seized him and wanted to judge him according to our law. So, generally speaking, there's three basic charges against Paul here. Number one, we have political treason. That's one charge they're bringing against him. And if you have the authorized King James, you'll notice it doesn't say that Paul is a plague. It said he is a pestilent fellow, kind of like that. Not a nice thing to say, but kind of a fun wording, a pestilent fellow. In Greek, the word is loimos, 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 for plague or pestilent, and it means a disease, figuratively a pest or a nuisance. Now, in the original Greek, if you look in your, let's see. So it doesn't bring it out here in the New King James, but in the original Greek, the words a and fellow in the King James and in the New King James, the wording's a little deceptive, but this word loimos, the way it's being used, Tertullus is not saying that Paul is a pestilent fellow. He's not saying that Paul is, well, we found him a plague. What he's saying is that Paul is the very pestilence itself. So he is the embodiment of the plague. So just a little bit harsher of an incrimination here. Tertullus knew the Roman government wouldn't ignore that charge. He knew the Roman government would not tolerate any sort of agitation or agitators who stirred up people into rebellion. So this is a pretty serious accusation. Number two, you have religious heresy. Now, in various instances, large crowds of Jews, they were known to get worked up into these religious frenzies. And historically, it had taken some degree of bloodshed to quiet things down again. And so the use of this phrase is intended to associate Paul here with, or these phrases, this creator of dissension, used to associate Paul's name with something negative. In fact, that's what we see with this phrase, ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. By saying that, they are associating Paul with the Messianic movement. Not like we have Messianics today, meaning people who are into the Hebrew roots. In this day and age, the Messianic movement was Jews who were looking for the Messiah. Remember, they were looking for this deliverer. They knew the scroll of Isaiah. They knew about all those prophecies that spoke about a deliverer. And so they were Jews looking for the return of or the arrival of the Messiah, and they did not tend to submit very well to the Roman authorities. The Romans were all too familiar with these people, and they knew what kind of trouble these false messiahs could cause. The word in Greek for ringleader is protostatis. Protostatis for ringleader. Proto, proto meaning first, protostatis. And it means one who stands in the front rank. So protostatus is a military term, and it refers to an officer who stands in the front. And uh, he also uses, or he uses the derogatory term here, Nazarene, calls him a member of the sect of the Nazarenes, and not just a member, but the forerunner, the leader of the sect of the Nazarenes. And this is not to be confused with a Nazarite. That's something totally different, not the same at all. This term Nazarene is a derogatory term of contempt and reproach, and it's used in reference, always in a negative connotation by accusers, in reference to Christians. So, kind of like in the United States, people down south back in the day, they would refer to people up north as Yankees. 2025, it doesn't mean anything. Back in the day, it did. It was an insult. So we have political treason against Paul, the accusation of religious heresy, and we also have a third one. But I think it's worth mentioning before we go to that despite being disparaged, Paul never responds with any sort of accusation of his own, even though he may have been justified in calling them out as hypocrites. So we also have this idea of temple desecration. So number 3, accusation against Paul, temple desecration. William Barclay says Paul is being called a defiler of the temple. The priests were Sadducees, and to defile the temple was to infringe upon the rights and the laws of the priests. This would have mattered to Felix. Why? Because, unlike the Pharisees, unlike even the Jewish anti-political group of the Zealots, the Sadducees were generally known to have supported Roman occupation. The Sadducees were generally known to have supported the Roman government. Why did they do that? They were getting benefits from it. Many times, benefits of position, authority, in some cases, money. This charge has a slight hint of maybe validity to it. Not that Paul is guilty, because he didn't defile the temple at all, but there's an element of truth to what they're saying, because he certainly did offend the Sadducees, of which the high priest was one. Because he asserted he asserted his belief in the resurrection of the dead. The Sadducees didn't believe in the resurrection of the dead. Sadducees didn't believe in a spirit world. And so he's not guilty of just desecrating the temple, but he has certainly put himself at odds with the Sadducees. Still, causing offense is not a reason for being punished by the Roman government. Verse 7 through 9. But the commander, Lysias, came by and with great violence took him out of our hands, commanding his accusers to come to you. By examining him yourself, you may ascertain all these things of which we accuse him. And the Jews also assented, maintaining that these things were so. So, Tertullus, he's pretending the Jews would have judged Paul fairly if Lysias hadn't intervened. What's the reality of the situation? They would have killed him. Also, we have a not so subtle jab at Lysias. He didn't do what they wanted, so they have got this Tertullus to subtly imply that he is derelict of duty. And, well, most noble, wonderful Felix, the only reason we're here today is because this commander isn't doing his job. That's what they're saying. They're saying he's making more work for you. We didn't want to bother you. So sorry about this. Maybe we can just hearken back to Matthew chapter 10, verse 16 through 20. If you'll just join me back there for just a second. Matthew chapter 10, before we move on to the next part of this chapter. Matthew 10, verse 16 through 20. We're hearkening back now to some of the words Jesus Christ said. And he said, "Behold, I send you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. Therefore, be wise as serpents, harmless as doves. Beware of men. They will, doesn't say might, doesn't say could, says they will deliver you up to councils. They will scourge you in synagogues. You will be brought before governors and kings for my sake, as a testimony to them and to the Gentiles. But when, not if, when they deliver you up," again, comforting words from Jesus Christ, don't worry. Don't worry about how or what you should speak. It will be given to you in that hour what you should speak. For it is not you who speak, but the Spirit of your Father who speaks, or which speaks in you. And you could also reference John 14:26, which talks about Spirit of God dwelling in a person. God's Spirit brings all things to remembrance. And Jesus Christ talked about the eye being the lamp of the body. In other words, the five senses, the things you bring into your brain and your brain processes, that's what's going to come out. If you're putting in the Word of God, if you're listening to sermons, if you're having spiritual discussions, that's what's going to come out. If you're putting in filth, or if you're not putting in filth, but you only put in worldly, physical, carnal things, that's what's going to come out. If all the conversations at church are based on what did you do at work, how's the weather, what health things are you dealing with, there could be an indicator there's not enough spiritual food going in. Again, that's not always the case. Sometimes we have things we deal with, but sometimes it is the case. So it's a lesson for us. But no doubt that this is exactly what Paul is experiencing, being brought before leaders, authorities, and witnessing for the kingdom of God. Now, Paul's Roman citizenship did give him procedural rights, as we're about to see. He does get a chance to answer for himself. There's a book titled Roman Society and Law, Roman Society and Roman Law in the New Testament by A.N. Sherwin White from 1963. And that book shows that under Roman law, provincial governors, they had a wide latitude in judgment, but they were expected basically to do three things. They were expected to, number one, hear both sides. So they couldn't just be partial in judgment, had to hear both sides. Number two, they're responsible for keeping peace. Number three, they were supposed to report any significant problems or issues, like a province trying to secede, or any sort of terrible uprising. They were supposed to support those things to their authority, their whoever they were submissive to. So hear both sides of the story, keep the peace, and report any significant problems up the line. Verses 10 and 11. Then Paul, after the governor had nodded to him to speak, answered, "Inasmuch as I know that you have been for many years a judge of this nation, I do the more cheerfully answer for myself, because you may ascertain that it has been no more than 12 days since I went up to Jerusalem to worship." Let's see here. Adam Clarke's commentary says there are a few different parts of Paul's defense here. And basically, there's two parts of his defense, and the second part of his defense is also broken down into parts 2A and 2B. So two parts of Paul's defense. We have what's known as the exordium, 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 and that's where you praise the judge, you list his qualifications. We see Paul doing that. Then you have what's known as the tractation. The tractation is the body of the defense, and it's broken down into two sections, each of which has three parts. In this case, so not always, but in this case, there are three parts to each one. So you've got the refutation, and in Paul's case, he begins refuting this thing, and he talks about um, the where the polluting of the temple. He refutes that idea. He also refutes the idea that he was stirring up sedition, and he refutes the idea that he was leading a new religious sect. So the next part to be, so you've got the exordium, and then you have the tractation. The two parts of the tractation are the refutation, and then second part of that is the affirmation. So he refutes and then he affirms this affirmation. He says he lived a blameless life. He was found purified in the temple and worshiping there. And he points out how Tertullus and his companions were speaking falsely. And then he goes on to challenge them to provide any proof or any witness who was actually there. And we'll see that in just a few verses here. So, verse 12 through 14. Paul goes on, he says, "They neither found me in the temple disputing with anyone, nor inciting the crowd, either in the synagogues or in the city. Nor can they prove the things of which they now accuse me. But this I confess to you, that according to the way which they call a sect, so I worship the God of my fathers, believing all things which are written in the law and the prophets." So, verse 14 here, we see Paul affirming that he does follow the way. And Paul sees that, he sees the way as a fulfillment of the law and the prophets. And he goes on and he says, listen, I worship the God of my fathers. This is a huge point that he's making here. And he's blowing one of the Jews' arguments right out of the water. Because remember, it's illegal to start new religions. But Paul is emphasizing that, hey, these religious things I'm doing, these beliefs, they're not new. I'm worshiping the same God my fathers did. And I believe everything that was written and everything that is read in the synagogues. All those things in the laws and the prophets that these Jews have in their temple. Now, both the Sadducees and the Pharisees, they should have, if they cared, should have been able to test what Paul was saying and verified the things he was teaching. But they had hardened their hearts to the truth. Verse 15 and 16. I have hope in God, which they themselves also accept, that there will be a resurrection of the dead, both of the just and the unjust. So Paul here begins to expound on this idea of a resurrection as Jesus Christ also taught. Let's go back to, just hold your place. We'll go back to John chapter 5. Back to John 5. Excuse me one moment. John chapter 5, verse 24 to 29. Most assuredly, I say to you, words of Jesus Christ. Paul's now expounding on these very things, and Jesus says, he who hears my word and believes in him who sent me has everlasting life, shall not come into judgment, but has passed from death into life. Most assuredly, I say to you, the hour is coming, and now is, when the dead will hear the voice of the Son of God. Those who hear will live. For as the Father has life in himself, so he has granted the Son to have life in himself, and has given him authority to execute judgment also, because he is the Son of Man. Do not marvel at this, For the hour is coming in which all who are in the graves will hear his voice. Come forth, those who have done good, to the resurrection of life, those who have done evil, to the resurrection of condemnation. So, those who have heard Jesus Christ's voice, in other words, those who have listened or obeyed, they will be resurrected to spirit life at the first resurrection. They will no longer be subject to the second death. Jesus is using a term referred to as prolepsis, speaking about something as though it already exists. They have already entered into life. Once you sign that covenant agreement, bam, you're set for life. As long as you continue on the trajectory you're on, as long as you don't deviate. Now, on the other hand, everyone else will experience a resurrection of condemnation. Everyone else who ever lived. Now, sounds bad in English. That's because it is, and it's not not the best rendering of this word. The Greek word here for condemnation is krisis, Krisis, and it means judgment. Discerning between two things, discerning between right and wrong. So condemnation is not the right word. Now, some people will receive the judgment that they didn't know what they were doing. They will be given an opportunity to repent. They will be given an opportunity to receive God's Spirit during the Great White Throne Judgment period. Unfortunately, some people will receive a judgment that they did know what they were doing, and they knowingly rejected God's correction. They knowingly rejected the lead of his Spirit living in them. Those people receive the judgment that they are to be cast into the lake of fire. And Paul, what he's saying, knowing that unrepented sin leads to eternal death, that prompted him to have a clear conscience because he didn't want to do anything that would lead him to die, plainly speaking. Back in Acts 24, verse 17 and 18. Now, after many years, I came to bring alms and offerings to my nation, in the midst of which some Jews from Asia found me purified in the temple, neither with a mob nor with tumult. All right, so Paul here in his defense, he notes a few things. He notes three things. First one is, guys, I have not been in town long enough to stir up a riot. Haven't been here long enough. Number two, I am actually bringing money into a region that's under Roman jurisdiction. Moreover, far from intending to defile the temple, I was bringing offerings to the temple. And then number three, nobody found me causing a ruckus. I was found in a purified manner. So 3 points he brings out in his defense. I haven't been here long enough recently. I'm actually bringing money here and even to the temple, and nobody found me causing a ruckus. Verse 19 through 21. Talking about these Jews from Asia, he says they ought to have been here before you object. If they before you object, they ought to have been here before you to object if they had anything against me. Or else, let those who are here themselves say if they found any wrongdoing in me while I stood before the council. Unless it's for this one statement which I cried out, standing among them, concerning the resurrection of the dead, I am being judged by you this day. So in verse 19, Paul mentions these Jews from Asia. What's he getting at? Well, what he's getting at here is, according to Roman law, the accusers had to be present. But the charges brought against Paul by Tertullus, they weren't legally represented. I should say, legally, they were not represented by the accusers. The high priest and the council members, they were not the ones who found him in the temple. And since these Jews were the proper Jews from Asia were the proper witnesses. It was their testimony alone which could convict Paul. And since they didn't come, he should have been released. And not only that, but Paul in this whole section here, he talks about he came to bring all these things back to his nation. What he's saying is these Jews who come to accuse me, they're not even part of my nation. I'm a Jew. I'm from here. They aren't even from here. So these are a bunch of foreigners. They may be Jews, but they're not from here like I can claim being from here. In this trial, Tertullus claims Tertullus's claims that he made, they're basically moot. The only thing about which the present prosecution could testify against Paul was his conduct before the council, and that's not the charges that they brought. So they had not brought this. Verse 22 to 24. But when Felix heard these things, having more accurate knowledge of the way, he adjourned the proceedings and said, when Lysias the commander comes down, I will make a decision on your case. So he commanded the centurion to keep Paul and to let him have liberty, and told him not to forbid any of his friends to provide for or visit him. Verse 24. And after some days, when Felix came with his wife Drusilla, who was Jewish, he sent for Paul and heard him concerning the faith in Christ. So Holman Study Bible has this to say about why Felix delayed in making a judgment. He says that Felix seemed to acknowledge that Tertullus had not been a faithful conveyor of the facts surrounding Paul's arrest. So didn't seem to be being honest about these things. Also, we notice it said he had a more accurate knowledge of the way. And so it seems he probably understood a little better than some of these stiff-necked accusers, some of the things Paul was saying. And scholars, Holman, other scholars suggest Paul's relative freedom within his imprisonment was likely due to his Roman citizenship. We have this reference here as well to a woman named Drusilla. And this chart that I'm going to put up on your screen, not necessarily that important to see, but I will speak it for you. So this is from Thomas Nelson's Study Bible. Not the chart, but what I'm about to read. They say, how did Felix know about the Christian faith? His wife Drusilla was Jewish. She was the great-granddaughter of Herod the Great, who had tried to kill baby Jesus. Drusilla was the great-niece of the Herod who killed John the Baptist. Drusilla's father was the man who had the apostle James put to death in Acts chapter 12. Also, Felix was well acquainted with Christianity from having governed Judea and Samaria for 6 years. Now, I don't know about you, but if I were in Paul's shoes and I'm here and I see somebody sitting in the court, somebody come in whose family is known, who has a history of persecuting the Church of God, who has a history of killing representatives of the one true God, I bet my heart would probably drop a little bit. And Paul's may have. He may have got a sinking feeling in his chest like, oh man. But regardless of his feelings, what did he do? Well, he exercised great faith. He exercised great trust in God's ability to protect. And Thomas Nelson's Study Bible goes on to say Felix had taken Drusilla from her former husband, and this was King Azizus, or Azizus, Azizus, King Azizus of Emesa in Syria. And Drusilla was Felix's third wife. Felix's first wife was the granddaughter of Mark Antony and Cleopatra. So he's marrying some famous people. His second wife was another princess whom he also divorced. And you can read. There's a lot of sources for all this material. Certainly, commentaries talk about it. Also, going back in history, Josephus, the historian, he records a lot of these extra biblical facts. He notes. So you may find this interesting. Josephus notes that Drusilla married Felix at age 16. Wow, that's a pretty young age to get married. What does that mean, though? If that's her second marriage and she's already been with a husband for a while, most likely she would have gotten married around age 13 or 14. Pretty young to be getting married. But again, as Mr. Scorseth has brought out in some of his Bible studies, that is the common age when people would typically get married because it's a lot of agrarian society. How do you get work done? Not with a tractor. You have a lot of kids. How do you have a lot of kids? You don't marry a 45-year-old woman. You marry a 13 or 14-year-old so she can bear children for many years, and you can have a better chance at having an heir that will survive. And so you can have many people to help work on your farm, or if you don't have a farm, help bring money to the family and uphold the family name. So just kind of interesting here. Now, you may not have ever wondered this, but maybe you have. Why did Drusilla, 16-year-old girl, maybe a couple years older than that at this point, why did she opt to attend Paul's trial or hearing? Most teenagers don't care about that kind of stuff. We don't know. But she was a Jew, or I should say a Jewess, they call them. Female Jews, a Jewess. She had this Jewish background. It's possible she was genuinely interested about what Paul had to say. So that's worth noting. Verse 25. Verse 25. Now, as he reasoned about righteousness, self control, and the judgment to come, Felix was, notice, afraid and answered, "Go away for now. When I have a convenient time, I will call for you." Word in Greek for afraid is emphobos. Emphobos. Of course, phobos is the word where we get the English word phobia. Emphobos, emphobos. And in case you're wondering about the pronunciation, when you see an OS at the end like that, that would be an OS. Unless it's an Omicron, then it would be an phobos, but this should be phobos. Anyway, this word emphobos means in fear. It means afraid. It means alarmed. It doesn't just mean, well, I'm just a little scared or, oh dear. It means in a state of trembling. It means terrified. That's what that word emphobos conveys for a meaning. Incidentally, if you reference, maybe we'll just turn there very quickly in Revelation 11:13, you'll have the same Greek word used in Revelation 11 in verse 13. The setting in Revelation 11, we have the end time, going through the time of the Gentiles, going through the time of the two witnesses. This is period of time of the Great Tribulation. And in verse 13, it says, in the same hour. So this is right at the end of the Great Tribulation. All these terrible things, the bowls of wrath are about to be poured out on the earth. And it says, in that same hour, there was a great earthquake. A tenth of the city fell. In the earthquake, 7,000 people killed. The rest were emphobos. They were afraid. They gave glory to the God of heaven. So they weren't just timid. They weren't just a little afraid. These people were shaking in their boots. They were ready to die of fear. That's the same word God inspired Luke to use in reference to Felix. So, why? Why was he afraid? I don't think we have to go into too much detail because it's pretty self-evident. He was afraid because he knew what Paul was saying was true. He was afraid because he felt guilty. This guy's he's a real louse. You know, he's going around, he's getting people to bribe him. His whole history of time is marred by corruption and deceit. He is sleeping with this girl who's 16 years old who's married to somebody else, and he's divorced 2 wives. He knew what Paul was saying was true. Verse 26 and 27 now. Meanwhile, he also hoped money would be given him by Paul, that he might release him. Therefore, he sent for him more often and conversed with him. Verse 27, but after 2 years, Porcius Festus succeeded Felix, and Felix, wanting to do the Jews a favor, left Paul bound. So this would have been roughly, I'll say, about AD 59 to AD 60. So somewhere in that time frame, Felix, he enjoyed hearing from Paul, but he had no real desire to change. Have you ever met somebody like that? I'm sure you have. I know some of you told me different stories of, oh man, I was so excited and I went to tell my family or whoever about this wonderful truth, and they shot me down. They didn't. It went over like a lead balloon. They didn't care at all to hear what I had to say. Uh, Sometimes you'll also meet people even at church. I've met many different people. Sometimes people come to church for a while and they just want to discuss. They just want to debate. They just want to reason. They just want to ask questions. They want to have discussions, but they don't ever want to change. They don't ever want to make a commitment. Oh yeah, they're happy to talk about these things. And in fact, you may reference 2 Timothy 3, verse 7, where Paul said those type of people, they're always learning, but never coming to the knowledge of the truth. The book of Thessalonians talks about people who have not received a love of the truth. They're happy to talk about it, but they don't love the truth. And that's going to be getting into one of our questions after the study here in just a few moments. Thomas Nelson's study Bible says Felix wanted to talk about a payoff, and Paul wanted to talk about righteousness. Felix was alarmed, right? He was alarmed by Paul's message, but he dismissed it. His procrastination is a sobering reminder for us. You know, yeah, we'll come back to that when it's convenient, but hey, why don't you give me some money? So a sobering reminder for us, because a takeaway lesson is conviction is not the same as repentance. Conviction is not commensurate with repentance. Now, it certainly makes your repentance last longer if you're convicted about what you're turning from, but a delayed response to either God's call or a delayed response to God's correction can lead to spiritual hardening of the heart. Now, we're getting to the end here. Paul's hands, we know they are sort of tied, if we can use that manner of speaking, and he's got nowhere to go. He's here for 2 years. At least he's able to have friends. He can have food, all those things. No doubt Satan is happy to waste his time, or was happy. Satan's happy to waste your time, my time. He doesn't care if he wastes our time or hurts us or damages our relationships or hurts our health or restricts our efforts. Satan wants to trip us up however he can. But does that restrict God? Does that limit God? No. Like many examples, God used what seemed to be a very negative situation and he turned it for good. In fact, we just finished covering that 2 Bible studies ago at the end of the life of Joseph in Genesis chapter 50. You meant it for bad, but God worked it for good. And so while here imprisoned, what are some good things that came out of it? Well, Paul was able to continue using this opportunity to witness to the Roman authorities. as well as any other prisoners he came in contact with. Paul had time to study, time to write, time to reflect, time to meditate. Paul was also, if you've been here for the past few chapters, he's also being protected by assassination attempts. One thing I have noticed so far in my spiritual walk, maybe some of you have noticed it as well. God's timing may not always match up with my timing, but God's timing often includes a purposeful waiting. And what may seem like injustice or what may seem like stagnation, usually it serves a larger purpose. So we're going to stop there. We will wait until next time to meet this guy named Festus, rather than introduce him now and then forget all about him and then come back to him later. So we'll talk about Festus later. We'll come into a break now. Next time we'll go into Acts 25. So there's 4 chapters left of the book of Acts, 25, 26, 27, 28. We'll get some introduction to Festus. We'll get some introduction to King Agrippa and his wife, Bernice. Bernice, incidentally, is one of Drusilla's sisters. But we'll get into her and we'll see a number of different things. Agrippa will hear Paul. Paul will get prepared to make a defense before Agrippa. So that's what's coming up in the next study. I want to just read through these discussion questions before we get into them for anybody who may watch the recording later. So I put 3 down in case, well, I just thought of this third one was kind of good and may prompt some good discussion. So 3 discussion questions. Number 1, why do you think Felix became afraid when Paul spoke about righteousness, self-control, and the judgment to come? And what does this reveal about the power of truth, even when it's shared respectfully and without accusation? Second question is, despite hearing Paul speak often, Felix delayed making a decision about faith. How can we guard against putting off spiritual decisions in our own lives? Number 3, Paul boldly testified about his hope in the resurrection of the dead, even while on trial. Why is the resurrection such a central part of the gospel message? And how might that hope strengthen us during trials or opposition? So those are the 3 study questions, or rather 3 discussion questions. If you can't stick around, appreciate you tuning in later if you weren't able to tune in. Otherwise, we'll go into the discussion questions now.